Dr. Pam Strachan is with us today, who will be talking about making room for grief, a resilient soul. We are so thankful that she's going to be speaking with us. And yeah, Dr. Strachan, take it over. We're so glad that you're here.
All right. Well, thank you for the invitation to share my passion, something that I'm very passionate about in talking about grief to help grievers to walk through grief in a very healthy way. So, to the YBS ladies, to the YBS Church, thank you so much for this invitation. And yes, you can invite me back again. I love you, ladies. So, it's been a joy. So I'm going to invite you to get a piece of paper. Make sure you have a piece of paper, a pen that you can write down things that may bubble up for you. You can write down things that were touched so that later on, after this is over, you can reflect back on something that was touched in the presentation. And I want you to know that if something bubble up for you to take the time to, and you feel like crying about it, cry about it. It's quite okay to do so. And so I hope that you can gain something meaningful from this presentation. Maybe not for yourself, but for someone else. So thank you. So folks often ask me, Pam, what led you down this path to be so passionate about grief? And so I'm going to start off by sharing a little bit about my story, because my story began in a space of grief. Some of you may have heard my story before, but I'll share a little brief aspect of my story that I was born into a household where grief was present. My dad and my mom, they at an early age, they had 4 children, and there were conflict in the home, there were trauma in the home, there was crisis in the home. And as a result of that crisis, they broke up. My mom left, my dad left, and we were sent off to our grandparents. And my grandparents, after raising 11 children, were now with 4 more children. And so the grief was the loss of my parents. Even though they were alive, I lost them. I grew up without them. And when I was in my teens, and I think I was around 17, 18, my grandmother, who was a mother to me, she passed away. And my grandfather passed away earlier, before my grandmother, but I was closer to my grandmother. And so that's where grief started for me. And amazingly, I was at the bedside of my grandmother when she passed away. And I ended up now in my life being at the bedside of people who are actively dying. And so that's a little bit, in a nutshell, about my journey that started out with grief. And I want you to know that nothing that we go through in life will be wasted. God always used the pain and the grief and the trials of life to work for our good. And so that's where my passion began. My friends, grief, as you know, it is widespread, and it is no respecter of person. And we are in a crisis in this country and throughout the world. Grief is everywhere. Our culture is saturated with grief. And so it is no respecter of person, culture, religion, or socioeconomic status. Everyone is affected by some level of grief. This morning, I decided to look at the statistic, um, with the COVID deaths in this country, and it's appalling. Over 427,863 people have died in this country as a result of the COVID virus. In Oregon alone, the deaths in Oregon, it's 1,877. And in Washington, some of you are living in Washington, it's 4,186. And I saw Dr. Yemi, who lives in Delaware. I'm sure if you look at the statistics there, there's quite a bit of people who have died from the COVID virus. So grief is widespread. And so that gives you a picture. These statistics will give you a picture of so many homes and hearts that are consumed with grief. And this is just a pandemic. There are other types of deaths as well. And so we are in a crisis, my friends, and this topic is very relevant for this time that we are living in. So, so you may say, Pam, what is the definition of grief? And it's very simple. If you don't learn anything from this grief support, from this workshop, I hope that you can walk away with this thought about the definition of grief. It is a natural response to loss. When you get a cut, that cut will bleed. When you experience a wound, you will feel pain around that wound. And so it is with the loss of a loved one or the loss of something that you have been connected with. You will experience grief around that loss. So it is a natural, and some would say a normal response to loss. And grief includes a broad range of feelings. You will feel pain when you have lost something or someone. And I'm saying something because when we hear the word grief, a lot of times people would think that it is related to death. And it's not only, we don't experience grief only that's associated with death. Whenever you have lost something that you were once connected to, you will experience grief. And so you will experience that internal response as a result of that grief. I've read a definition for grief that it is a collection of feeling. You're going through grief, you will feel. And feeling is healing, even though we don't like to feel pain. But when we have gone through grief, gone through a loss, and we experience the feeling that comes with it, healing is taking place. So in the American culture, grievers avoid the topic of mortality, deny the impact of loss, and try to quickly regain control and closure. According to Joanna Ebenstein, on the topic of death, she said, Americans want the good without the bad. We want life without death. We want pleasure without pain, light without dark, but that does not exist. And so in the American culture, it is easy for grievers to take a stoic approach to dealing with grief. When I was doing my dissertation on complicated grief, I decided to meet with the Aroma culture from Ethiopia to find out how they deal with grief in their community. And it's totally different from the American culture. American culture takes a stoic approach to grief, whereas in the Aroma culture, and this is a group of people there in Portland, they grieve in community. They do not grieve in isolation. And so coming to this country, it's a little difficult for them because they approach grief with wailing and crying out loud in community. And so there is a fear in this culture that when they get together and weep and cry, they're concerned that the neighbors may call the police. And so they'll grieve in community. And when they come together, they cry. Men and women, they come together and they would cry. They would get out what's on the inside on the outside. And that is what mourning is. Mourning is the grief that you're going through on the inside. It's gone public. You express it, you get it out so that you can cope with the loss. So, so grief is not, according to Dr. Earl Grolman, who is an authority on grief, he said this, which I really like this quote. He said that grief is not a disorder. We at times we treat it like it's a disorder, but grief is not a disorder. It's not a disease or a sign of weakness. You will notice that you may have a friend or a loved one who may be going through grief, and that person will well up with tears, and that person will cut off the tears as the tears are about to flow, because tears at times are looked upon as a sign of weakness. But it is not a sign of weakness. It is an emotional, I want you to hear me clearly, it is an emotional, physical, and spiritual necessity. When you have lost someone or something, it is a necessity that you experience that emotional, physical, and spiritual experience around it. And so grief is the price we pay for love. The deeper we love, the more we love, the more pain we will experience as a result. So I'm going to read that quote again, that grief is not a disorder, a disease, or a sign of weakness. It is an emotional, physical, and spiritual necessity, the price you pay for love. And he said, the only, listen to this carefully, the only cure for grief is to grieve. The only cure for grief is to grieve. Isn't that powerful? So there are different types of losses. There is the actual loss. This is a tangible loss identified by others, such as death. You will experience, some people experience what's called perceived loss. And this is identified by the person experiencing it. There is situational loss, and this is the type of loss that are caused by unexpected or unusual circumstances. There is ambiguous loss. We're not really sure what happened. And the disenfranchised loss. This is a type of loss unrecognized by others. I could spend a whole workshop talking just about disenfranchised loss. And with disenfranchised loss or losses, it's a type of loss that like for example, divorce or the death of a pet, the loss of a job. You know, when you have lost a loved one, our culture has rituals around honoring the life of someone who has died. Whenever there is a divorce or a breakup or the death of a pet, there is no acknowledgement at times. There's no cards at times. And so grievers who are dealing with disenfranchised losses, they grieve in isolation, because at times that grief is not acknowledged, like the death of a person. So at this time, I would like to invite you to, on your paper, to write down 5 people that you have lost this year or in the past couple of years. 5 significant people that you have lost. And on the other side, 5 people you have lost. On the other side of your paper, also write down 5 things that you have lost. And that could be a relationship, it could be a pet, it could be job, finances. So 5 people you have lost and 5 things that you have lost. So I'm going to give you a moment to write down those things. So take a moment and write down those losses. I'll give you another minute to write down those losses. 5 people you have lost, and also 5 things that you have lost. And I hope that if you're comfortable, it's okay, Paula, go ahead.
Honey,
Give you 10 more seconds. All right. So I would if you feel comfortable, can you share one person that you have lost and one thing that you have lost? Anyone feel comfortable sharing that from your list?
so this I lost my uncle, one of 5 people last couple of years, and we had to put down our pet Bo.
Yeah.
Both very hard.
Someone else.
This is Jan. I lost my dad and my brother within 13 days apart in January of last year.
Yeah. Anything else you have lost, Jan?
My sister-in-law, Marlene, and of course, my other sister-in-law, Paulette, and a close friend of mine, Martha. And of course, my best friend, she has dementia, but it's as if she's died.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Lots of losses. Someone else. Noel, if you're speaking, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, I've lost my sister 8 months ago. And I also lost my job about 6 months ago. Yeah. Those are the 2 hardest I think I'm dealing with right now.
Thanks for sharing that. And I think about even with the loss of a job, there are other layers of losses that go with that. You know, the loss of the connection that you have established with people. So you lost that, you end up losing that connection.
Yeah.
And also the financial piece, you know, you pay the bills in your home, you're the man of the house. There are other layers of grief that goes with that. So,
Okay.
so someone else.
Hi, this is Flora. I lost my brother. Well, been about a year ago, and then just lost my husband about 5 months ago.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So these losses are real. This is real. These are people that we have been connected with and been in relationship with that we have lost. Anyone else feel comfortable sharing what you have lost? So people you have lost, something that you have lost.
Hi, this is Terry. Um, just a week ago, I lost a cousin, um, my father-in-law several months ago, and my mother about 2 years ago.
Mm. Very personal losses. Anyone else? So I'll go on if there. Thanks for sharing those personal and intimate losses. And whenever we experience the loss of a loved one, we go through it. We are impacted in different ways. We are impacted spiritually, emotionally, physically, socially, and cognitively. So our entire being is affected with that loss. So this is how we are emotionally impacted by grief. We experience sadness. There is this numbness that we will experience. At times I hear people say that I feel guilty. And I feel guilty about the death of my loved ones. And whenever I hear people talk about guilt, I often ask them, is your guilt realistic? And to feel guilty at times, it is a part of the grieving process. It's saying
Pam, we can't hear you if you have to unmute.
I'm sorry, I don't know what happened here. So I mentioned about the emotional impactment of grief, that we are emotionally impacted by grief and we will experience sadness, we will experience numbness, guilt. Grievers often feel guilty that there was something that they could have done that they did not do. And when I hear grief, the guilt in grief, I often ask the grievers, is your guilt realistic? There are times there will be fear of the unknown, fear that I will die too. There's anxiety. Whenever you have been bonded with someone for a period of time and been in relationship and that bond is broken, there are times it will trigger anxiety. And at times there will be anger. I am so angry of her that my loved one has passed. I'm angry that this person did not take care of him or herself. At times I hear anger towards God. I thought God was going to heal this person, and I did not get the miracle that I expected to get from God. And there are times when there are anger towards God. And if there is anger towards God, God can handle that. So the emotional aspect of grief, you will experience those feelings around it. And give attention to those feelings that surface. At times we will be physically impacted because grief is physical. When you have lost a loved one, at times you may get a lot of sleep and you still wake up feeling tired because grief is physical. You will get headache, stomach ache. You will experience trouble sleeping. There are people who can't sleep at night because of the grief. The loss of appetite. People would say, I can't eat. I'm hungry, but I don't have the appetite to eat. And there are times where there's constant weeping. And griever will sigh quite a bit. Oh, it's like waking up the lungs to breathe. So you will find grievers at times taking deep breaths, sighing quite a bit. And at times, the immune system will become weak as a result of those losses. Cognitively, Grievers will be impacted. There will be confusion. There are people who experience thoughts of suicide, and so there will be obsessive thinking. Like if you were present when your loved one passed away, there are times when the picture that was before you, it will continue to go through your mind over and over again. And at times grievers, they will say that my mind just keep racing. I cannot turn off my thinking. Any questions, comments, or feedback so far? Is it coming through clear? Okay. Also, grievers will be impacted spiritually. There will be questions and searching for meaning. There are times grievers will move closer to God, and at times they will drift apart from God. Or sometimes grievers will share with me that I find it difficult going to church because my loved one used to be a part of the leadership at the church, and when I go to church, that person is missing. I can't handle that. Or there will be a song that reminds the griever of that person. So, and I want to say that this is different for everyone. Not everyone have these same responses. Grievers will be impacted socially. There will be isolation at times with some grievers. There are grievers who feel alone. I don't have my loved ones around anymore. I feel so alone. And if you will also notice that your friendship, after you lost a loved one, sometimes you may notice that your friendship list will decrease because there are many who are uncomfortable with the grief. They don't know what to say. It's uncomfortable. Don't be surprised if your friendship list decrease after the death of your loved one. So grief is an individualized and personalized experience. Be aware that one size does not fit all. When I was in Portland, I was called to the emergency room to be with a family who have lost a loved one. And when the parents came and they saw that their daughter had died, they were pretty stoic with their grief. And when the sister of this person who passed away walked into the room, she screamed with everything within her body. She screamed so loud. I remember a staff member came and closed the door. And when I walked them out of the hospital separately, I recall the daughter, the sister of this patient who passed said, I don't understand why my parents, they're acting like nothing happened. And for her, she was surprised by the way they were grieving. And I had to share with her that everyone grieved differently. And she was more expressive in her grieving process, whereas her parents were more stoic with their grief. So one size does not fit all. Everyone grieve differently, and how you grieve is dependent on your personality. Are you the type of person who is introverted, or are you extroverted? How were you raised to deal with grief? At times, how was your relationship with the person who has passed away? How was the person when the person died? The spiritual belief of the person. So all of these things can affect the way that someone grieves the loss of a loved one. When my aunt, I have an aunt in Chicago, when her husband died, she said to me, Pam, I don't know about his spiritual life. I don't know where he was with God. And so I don't know about his relationship with God. And so she said that really bothers her, that he has died and she doesn't know where he's going. And so that added to her grief because she has the assurance of salvation. And here her husband has died and she was not sure if she's going to see him again in heaven. So things like that will affect the way that we grieve. Any questions or comments? So yesterday I talked about in my sermon making room. In order for you to make room for your grief, it's important to make room for God because he's the one that helps us with the healing process around our grief. So making room for grief, I'm going to give you 5 simple steps on how to make room for grief. Number 1, it's important, my friends, that you make room for grief by acknowledging the reality that this is a difficult time and I am hurting. So you acknowledge that this is a time that is difficult in my life and I'm hurting. And so that is a process where you can begin the work of making room for grief, basically acknowledging your loss and acknowledging your grief. You are being present with your grief. It's easy to dismiss, it's easy to suppress, but I want you to know that when we suppress or dismiss our grief, it will constantly wave for attention. And so acknowledging the fact that you are hurting and this is a difficult time is the beginning process of making room for grief. Also, in making room for grief, it is important that you be attentive. Give attention to your emotions. I talked earlier about the different types of feelings that we will have around our grief. You will feel sad. You will feel disappointed. You will experience the shock around your loss. You will experience disbelief, numbness, frustration. And so you want to give attention to those feelings that you have around your loss. And so again, being present with your feelings, write those feelings down. And I will encourage you, as you know, you are dealing with grief, that you get a journal. Get a journal and write down the things that you experience around your grief. Writing in your journal will give you that space to be honest and upfront with what's going on the inside. It's a way of getting what's on the inside on the outside. That's what helps me through my grief. I just write about it. I write what I'm feeling. I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling frustrated. I'm feeling this, I'm feeling that. And I process that in my journal. So you make room for grief by giving attention to your emotions. You make room for grief by being available to the experience, giving yourself permission to be available to heal. And I want to say, my friends, that healing is a choice. It is a choice. And recently I was reading through the story of this man who was an invalid. And this man, he was in his condition for over 38 years. And he will go to this pool at the sheep gate, expecting to get into the water at a certain time. And Jesus showed up at that pool. He saw the man on the mat and he asked the man, Jesus knew all about his situation, and yet still Jesus asked him, do you want to be well? And in that, I see that choice piece. Do you want to be well? And Jesus knew that he want to be well. That's why he showed up there. But he asked him anyway, do you want to be well? And Jesus healed him. He helped him. So healing is a choice. You can't change the story of what happened regarding the death of your loved ones, but you have the choice to choose a path of healing for yourself. I talked about yesterday how valuable we are, that how God knitted us in our mother's womb, and how important and valuable we are to him, and that it's not okay to not take care of ourselves. When you receive a cut and you start to bleed, you're going to take time to make sure that bleeding stops. And so it is not okay to experience the wound of grief and you just dismiss it. You just let it go. It is important to take care of yourself. We owe it to ourselves and to those around us to make sure that we take care of ourselves mentally, spiritually, and emotionally. So we make room for grief by recognizing that every grief takes time to adjust. Every loss will need significant time and patience to adjust. And so being patient with yourself as you confront your grief is so important in facing and experiencing recovery in your grief. And in making room for grief, it is important that you cultivate an openness to supportive care during moments of your pain. And what I mean by that is it's important that you allow others to help you. There are people around us who want to help. Let them help us. We are never meant to struggle alone. Just like how we like to help others, there are people who like to help us. And to give ourselves permission to let them help us, I think is very important. So we need each other, especially during these times where we are isolated, we are alone. It is important to connect with each other. People need people. We are never meant to struggle alone. So I'm going to stop here. I want to hear what you're thinking. If you have any thoughts or comments, I want to hear about it. I don't want to be the only one talking. Let me hear what's going on your in your thoughts. So unmute yourself, and I want to hear what you have to say.
Wow. I just want to say, like, especially that last piece of like, well, there's a few, but one piece of people grieving differently and understanding that. I think sometimes, especially if you are the kind of person that is emotionally empathetic, it can kind of like, I don't want to say disturb, but like affect you if you're sad and then someone else is sad, or if you don't feel as sad as someone else. It's like just like the realization of, the differences, I think is important. And I'm glad you pointed that out. And also like the part that you said at the end, opening yourself up to helping. If you are a person who is isolating through your grief, like realizing like there are people who want to help you. I think that that's important.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I think about when I was getting ready to move from Gresham, my neighbor came by and she said, Pam, she knew that I'm selling my house, so that's a big loss. And she said, Pam, I want you to know that if you just need to talk, I want you to know that I am here for you. And she said, even if you have to call me 2 o'clock in the morning, 2 a.m. in the morning, she said, please reach out. She was making herself available. And I was thinking to myself, I'm not going to call her 2 o'clock in the morning, but she was honest. You know, she was making herself available to me to let me know that I'm here for you. And so that's important. And there are times I realize that there are people who are going through grief who need support and help, and they won't they won't let you know. Like I remember the Spirit said to me one time when my girlfriend lost her stepmother. He said, just fix the food and bring it to her, because she's the type of person that she will not ask. So I fixed the food and I called her up and I said, you know what? I made some food for you and your husband. And she and her husband came to get the food, and she was so appreciative of that support. So, any other
And
comments?
yeah, the fact that people grieve differently, and understanding that sometimes people think they are okay and they are not.
Mhm,
Sometimes we don't know how we feel.
mhm,
We know we feel a way. We
mhm,
may need help and support. And it's as you're saying, you don't know. You've made the statement, they won't ask. Sometimes people don't even know what they need.
mhm,
They're in, as you described, all of these emotions that we go through, the sadness, numbness, guilt, anxiety, the anger, all of these things, you're sighing a lot. Those are emotions that, or actions that we're going through. We may even be acting out and we don't even see ourselves.
mhm,
So
mhm,
being perceptive, and I believe it takes the Christ to show us that, to be perceptive of the
mhm,
need of somebody else, and
mhm,
to be there anyway, and to understand that a person may not respond even kindly, and not to take it personally, because it's not about you. People
mhm,
are grieving
mhm,
and they're going through their grief in the
mhm,
way that they are.
mhm.
Yeah.
And you made a point about people acting out, you know.
Hmm.
There are times people may behave a certain way and you're not sure, you know, you may be caught off guard, you
Hmm.
know, why did this person act this way? You know, quick and abrupt, and people are dealing with things internally that they don't know what to do with. Um, and so it's easy to retaliate and be sharp back and be quick back with that person, but we don't know what people are dealing with. And a lot of times behind the scene is grief. It's grief that people don't know how to cope with, because no one taught us in school how to deal with grief. You know,
Yeah,
no one taught me how to deal with grief.
yeah.
And it's something that I learned over time. And so I think personally, I think that there need to be training in schools to help young people, especially now, to help young people to know how to deal with grief, how to deal with their emotions, and how to handle the loss of a loved one. There are a lot of kids who are losing their loved ones. Mhm.
Yeah, thank you, Pam. And this is Amy from Delaware. My question is actually in the direction that the conversation is going. Some people, I don't know if they don't know they are grieving or they don't want to accept it. For some reason, they are not grieving when they should be grieving.
Mhm.
And you told us that the only way, the only thing to handle grief is to grieve. Um,
Mhm.
and I believe that. And I believe that if it does not go out in a controlled way, it's going to somehow be damaging at some point.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so I struggle with a situation or two where people have just refused to even acknowledge the fact that there is need to grieve. So, what is the practical solution? You mentioned a friend who you say, I'm bringing this. It's not even for whether you want me to bring this. I have made the food and it's for you. I'm not asking. But in this case, the individual, similar situation, still does not. It's like, oh, not even dealing. What is any other practical tip to help folks acknowledge and grieve?
Mm-hmm. Very, very good question, Yemi. I think we can't force people to grieve. I think that from my perspective, I think the best way to deal with that situation is to befriend that person, to be a friend to that person, because we can't force anyone. Like I mentioned, that healing is a choice, and so by befriending that person and giving attention to that person, I think eventually that person may start to open up to you. So I think the key is befriending that person. Maybe someone else has a thought around that. But
Well,
from my perspective is befriending that person.
I
Go
have a
ahead.
thought.
Go ahead.
I have a thought, but not around that. You look at the story of Aaron and his sons. There was no grief after those guys were killed because of the way that they went about their life. Aaron didn't cry. He showed no emotion. And I think that's another avenue, not saying that that's how you should grieve, but that's another avenue that sometimes comes up where the sons were doing so evil and so much against God that there was nothing. And Aaron said nothing and did nothing, didn't cry, didn't say, why my sons, just let it be.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things, Pam, I wanted to just say is, I think being present to your question and in a response to Yemi, that sometimes just being there. Mm-hmm. Learn that when people are grieving, I have learned over the years to just come alongside and just be there. You just sit with people. And I think about Job's friends, and those of us who know that story, but just being there, just sit there. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to do anything. Just
and
be
they didn't
present.
say anything for a long time, right?
Right. Just be present.
Yeah.
And that is very powerful, to be present. It's a lot of times we may feel like we got to do something. I think that I was guided to prepare that food for that person because I know that person personally, and the Lord knew, and sometimes being present with the Spirit will help guide. It will guide us to what to do. But at times we don't always have to do something. Just like Sandranita said, being present, it's a wonderful gift that you can offer to someone.
May I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead.
We look at Jesus, and I wonder what was his grieving process? Was that in the Garden of Gethsemane, grieving for the world, or at the time of his good friend Lazarus' death? Said Jesus wept. I know he was weeping for more than one reason, but when we look at the way that he grieved, or the way that he dealt with things that were of sorrow, it gives us an example of what we must do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, he was the savior of the world, and he was fully human at the same time, and so he experienced the emotion and the pain that the people that he was connected with experienced, and so yes, he wept when his friend died. And I know that men and women grieve differently. Men tend to be more they tend to be doers, so they do things, and that's their way at times in dealing with their grief. They got to do something, whereas women tend to be more emotional. So it's good to see and to read about how Jesus wept when his friend Lazarus died.
I
Any
have a
other thoughts?
question.
Sure.
Yes. So what about times when, I don't remember if you mentioned this, but like, is relief a part of grief? And can it overpower the grieving process or push it back a little bit? The reason I ask this is because I think about people who have been the caretakers and they've had this long time of caring for someone. And then it seems like after they pass, there's also like a, oh, now I can get some rest piece that comes with their grieving. Like, I don't know. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Is there some connection there, or
Say more, Paula. Say more about that.
just thinking about how, people who've been caring for someone, for like, for instance, for someone that's been very, very, very sick, but they've been sick for a long
Years.
time on
Mhm.
hospice or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been a long, long, long time.
Mm-hmm.
And, that is a lot of physical, emotional um, drain, for lack of a better word. But it's like you put so much into caring for this person. And then when they pass, sometimes it's like, oh, and I've noticed that sometimes it's like, oh, now I'm going to go to the beach. Or, now I'm going to go and get my nails done or something like that. And to me, it looks like, oh, you look relieved a little bit. So that's kind of what I was wondering about that.
I completely got it. I understand what you're saying. And I think that caregiving is very heavy. And I work with caregivers quite a bit, and I hear that heaviness and I see that tiredness. And yes, a lot of times, because they have been with their loved one for so long and seen that suffering day in and day out, at times they get tired of seeing that suffering. And so yes, when the death happens, there is a sigh of relief. And it releases them to also do something special for themselves, whereas prior to the death they could not get away to take care of themselves. And but even though there is a release and a relief, yet still they do grieve as well the death of that person, the person that person used to be. So they do grieve, even though there is this release from that burden of care.
I noticed that with my father's death and also my sister's death. My mom was the primary caregiver for those individuals. And after my father's death, it was kind of like you know, not that she wanted him to die, but after his death, she knew that there's no more pain, there's no more suffering for him, and also took some of the burden off of her, of bringing him food every day, of sometimes wiping his butt every day. You know what I mean? All those things that go along with caregiving. Yeah, there was kind of a exhale, but then afterwards, after the exhale, then maybe a year later or so, my mother was like, I really miss that guy. I really miss that guy. So yeah, there's a lot of human beings. We're very interesting because there's a lot of emotion that goes along with our life. We can experience the birth of a child and laugh, and their birthday comes around and we celebrate. And then there's the death of someone and we cry and we long for, the day that we might see that individual again. I remember there was a death in the church years and years ago, Derek Baker. And I believe I cried the most in my entire life over his death because, like we were talking about earlier, we didn't know what his relationship was with God. He took his own life. So it was like, now you cry because it's like, wow, what is going to happen to this guy? Am I ever going to see him again?
And I also want to say, Kent, as you described the experience with your loved ones, I realized that there are times, and this is also in connection to Paula's question, there are times when grievers or caregivers will feel that release and feel relieved that their loved one is no longer suffering anymore. And there are times when they also feel guilty for feeling that release and relief, because they think that they shouldn't be feeling this way. And so they go through guilt about feeling that release, and they come to me to help me sort that out with them. And so anyway, let's move on if there's no more comments. Thank you so much for your feedback. I'm still thinking about Yemi's question though. Yemi, was the responses that you have heard was it helpful?
Sure it is. Thank you, everyone. The comment about, at least by God's grace, the comment about just being there, because I hear people who say to me, oh, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. We don't have to. And I think sometimes we have a discomfort because we really feel helpless, but we are looking at the help in our definition of help. Just knowing that that person is there next to you. So if in a span of 15 minutes of silence, they decide to 1 second reach out for a hand, the hand is there to squeeze. And then, if that's all that was achieved. And I think, so I find that I just, sometimes you still feel like, especially if it's someone, as in my example, that well, you think we don't know anybody, that you interact with often, that there is a lot of ungrieved grief. And it does take a toll, I think. And so that's where the concern is coming from, is there any other way we can help folks really, like just express, because feelings are going to be addressed. This is what psychologists tell us. They are not going to, all your feelings are going to get a way to come out, but how is a question. It's not if. So if you have fear, it will come out. If you have grief, it will come out. But what is a non-destructive, a productive way? Because sometimes these things can be productive, as you said at the beginning, Pam, that there is none of these things, none of our experiences that God lets go to waste. In fact, He's known all of them anyway before they happen. So they have use. So but thank you for coming back to that.
You're welcome. And I want to also add to, in addition to being present with someone during their grieving process, I think also, like also a phone call, calling that person and let that person know, you know what, I'm thinking about you today, sending a card to that person, so these little things, let that person know that, this person really care about me and what I'm going through. So, so those are some things that you can do. So here are some thoughts that prevent grievers from investing in their grief process after a loss. I have heard, I did not know where to turn after my loss. I know someone personally who is a has her degree in family counseling, and she said, Pam, when my loved one passed away, I did not know where to turn to get help. And not knowing where to turn after a loss can prevent grievers from investing in their grief. I thought if I give myself time, time will heal my wound. Let's give it some time. Or I have heard, I am a strong person. I have gone through tough times before, and I can handle this. I can handle this. I'm a strong person. I have also heard, God will take care of me. I have strong faith. And even though we know that God will take care of us, it's important for us to take care of ourselves as well with the gifts that He has given to us. I'm so surprised that this experience is so painful. I told her that it's okay to let go. I give that person permission to go, and that I'll be all right, but I am not all right. I want him back. I want her back. Um, I thought I could handle this, but I just can't stop crying. So these are some things that I've heard from grievers. And so as you are journeying on with loss in your journey, some questions to ask yourself. What do I need to cope? What do I need to cope? And who do I need to cope? Like I mentioned before, we are never meant to be alone. People need people. You look at the Trinity, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. They operate in community. And there are times when grievers may think, I can handle this, but we are never meant to be alone. And so what do you need to cope, and who do you need to cope? So I'm going to share some ways that can help you to cope. But before I go into that, I want to say that the type of resources you reach out for is dependent on your personality type. I mentioned earlier about grievers tend to be, there are introverts and extroverts. Are you an introvert or are you an extrovert? Whether you are an introvert or extrovert, there are resources available to help you with your specific need. So some practical and healthy ways to cope. You can write these down if you have a pen. Relationship with others. The relationship with others is a healthy way to cope with loss. Reach out to a friend, a family member, those who you know really care about you, will be very helpful. So that relationship with others is very important. Avoid personal isolation. It can harm you instead of helping you. Another healthy way to cope is social support. And I know this is a difficult time that we're in right now, where we're trying to limit our interactions because of the pandemic, but we can reach across the aisle in a different way, with a phone call, with sending a card, like I mentioned before, and you can come up with creative ways to reach out to others. But social support is known to be a great buffer when we are going through the loss of a loved one. Exercise. This is a time where it's important to engage with taking care of yourself through exercise. I used to love going to the gym. I would go to the gym 3 times a week. And I can't go to the gym. And self-care is important to me. And so I have to be creative in coming up and developing a workout plan at home that works for me. And so it is important to engage in some kind of exercise to make sure that you cope well with the grief in your life or with life itself. And as you make room for grief, it's important to make room to do some serious self-care, and exercise is one of them. You will feel better when you go walking. It will clear your mind. You're able to breathe in the fresh air, and you will experience resilience every time you do some exercise. Also, proper nutrition. Proper nutrition is so important because I've mentioned before that grief is physical. And so it's important to be intentional about taking care of yourself by engaging in proper nutrition, drinking a lot of fluid. Grievers cry a lot, so you need to replenish yourself by drinking a lot of water. Also, turning towards your religious resources to cope is very helpful. We are living in a time it's hard to go to church. There's fear about going to church. And so connecting to your religious resources, reading books and anything religiously that can help you to cope, utilize it. Another thing is prayer. Prayer. Engaging in prayer, taking the time to seek God's guidance in the midst of your loss will help you to navigate through your grieving process in a healthy way. There are great benefits to praying. It will help to transcend your situation and bring Christ's presence close during your time of grief. I cannot go through difficulties in life without connecting with God. And so I have to get connected to that spiritual piece to help me. And so there are different types of prayer that you can engage with. Journaling, you can pray that way by journaling. I suggested getting a journal if you're going through grief. You can also, I know some churches, I know Paula mentioned about, they have the YBS church, they have a prayer group and they meet a certain time each week. And so personal prayer, a prayer group, partnering with another person, prayer walks. There are times when I go on prayer walks, praying for different situations. And so engaging in your spiritual life will help you to get through grief in a healthy way. Another one is trust in God. And there are times when grievers move away from God because they said, oh, they feel that distance, like God is not there. I hear that a lot. I've been praying to God for healing and I did not get the healing. But God can be trusted when we are going through the struggle of grief. God can be trusted in the dark as well as the light. He comes to us in our pain and comfort us. I read recently where Christ said to those who were trying to persecute him, he said this, he said, my Father is always at his work to this very day, and I too am working. And what that tells me is that God is always on the job. He's always on the job and he's available to help us. The psalmist David said this about trust in the Lord. He said, the Lord is a refuge for the oppressed, a stronghold in times of trouble. Those who know him those who know your name trust in you, for you, Lord, have never forsaken those who seek you. And so when we seek him, we will get the help that we need from him. And so reading scripture and letting the scripture speak to your experience is very, very encouraging and helpful. Also, just trusting in the Lord, my friends. Just trusting in God while you're going through this process will be vital. And don't ignore your community as you are going through grief. So other practical ways to cope, I think it's important as you are going through grief, is to check up with your doctor. Check in with your doctor, because grievers at times feel aches and pains, and the stress sometimes can impact the body in a tremendous way. So making some time to check in with your doctor, I think that is very helpful. Get connected to a support group. And I know that there are virtual support group available that you can connect with others who are going through grief. Creative art. One of the things I used to do as a hospital chaplain coming home with stress, I used to sit down on the ground with my crayon and my book, and I would color. I'll do art. And it really helped me to get out the stress, the frustration, and the pain from the inside on the outside. I always feel better whenever I sit on the ground and do some artwork. So engage in artwork, creative artwork, and it will help you. And I love this one, and that is listening to music. Listening to music can be such a therapy for the soul. And you may have some. Any thoughts you have about how to care for yourself while you're going through grief?
Well, one of the things that I heard while you were speaking, you mentioned many things, but you know what you did? You basically went through the 8 laws of health: exercise, nutrition. These things are the things that cause you to be well, even without the grief process. And then the last thing that you mentioned was trust in God, which is probably the most important. It's very interesting how you articulated that. It was very thoughtful. There's a saying that goes like this. It says, prayer, and you talked about prayer, it says, prayer is the answer to every problem in life. It puts us in tune with the divine wisdom that knows how to adjust everything perfectly. Mm-hmm. So prayer is essential to maintaining a mental balance.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Well said. Thank you. Noel,
Pam,
I think you want to say something.
Pam,
Noel is speaking, but he's on. You want to get off of mute, Noel?
Unmute yourself, Noel.
Well, as he's getting off of mute, there is a comment in the chat, and I thought maybe you might want to talk to that. Which would tie into what you're talking about, self-care, with respect to experiencing guilt for the death of a loved one and feeling ashamed about it at the same time.
Okay, let me look at that. I've experienced that, and part of me felt guilty that I relieved that they died, but ashamed as well.
I'm unmuting, but people are still getting in before me.
Okay.
We hear you now.
Go ahead, Noel.
Yeah, my question is, I experienced. I have my sister passed away about 8 months ago, and it's a big. My mother had a lot of children, and what I find myself doing, what I did that I remember for the past about 4 or 5 months after the death, is that I hardly wanted to speak to my siblings. And it wasn't until about 6 months that I kind of just opened up and was in a spirit to communicate with them. Was it that I was angry, or was I just grieving? It's as if it's better now than it was 6 months ago. Is it because I know they was grieving too, that I didn't want to just be myself? Not that I was an extrovert. I'm not an introvert, but for some reason I kept myself away from them. What's the reason for that?
Well, that's a very good question.
I mean, verbally, yes.
I can't answer that question. I don't know what you were going through.
Okay.
But I do know is that there are times when grievers just need that space to deal with the pain of the loss, the shock, the numbness. And so
Okay.
I think it's, even though I mentioned not to isolate yourself, there are times when it's important to just step back,
Okay.
to take care of yourself. You recognize you need that space. And after you've taken that space to deal with the shock and the pain of that immediate loss, then you may feel better to communicate. So some people don't want to talk at that moment. I just
Okay.
need some time. So it could be that you needed some time and some space to
Okay.
deal with the shock and the reality of that
And,
immediate
and
loss.
it felt as if that was affecting, my silence was affecting some of my siblings. It's not that I totally cut myself off from them, but I would talk to one or two and then they would say, oh, you know, such and such want you to call them. And as I call that person, the whole floodgate open as far as communication. So I don't know. But that's what I experienced, I mean, 6
And
months
I
ago.
think it was okay. I think it was okay to take the time to deal with what you were going through. And when you got
Okay.
ready, you reached out.
Okay. All right. That was my question.
You know, there's a lot of information here. And even with this information, the grieving process can still come upon you in a way that you wouldn't think that it would come upon you. You know, we're dealing with, you know, it's kind of interesting because as Christians, it's kind of like it's a little bit different for us to a degree because it's just a little bit different because especially if we know the individual lived a life that was in our sight pleasing to God, it makes us feel a little bit different because we know we'll see them again.
Right.
I've gone through some issues, and I feel like because of this is how I'm kind of weird because if something happens to me or a death, like I said, I cried the most when I knew someone was living a life that was contrary. But like when my mom passed and my father passed, it was not as emotional because I knew my parents. You know, I knew what kind of life they lived. It was not as emotional as it could have been. We look. Go ahead.
And I must say that even though at times we know where our loved ones will be, we have the hope that we will see them again. That brings a lot of comfort.
Yeah.
And at the same time, there are moments when we will experience things, hear things, see things that will remind us of them in a very nice way, and it will trigger tears. It will trigger moments because you know, I have come to realize that and it may be hard to hear this, but grief is never done. It's something that we live with. We live with loss, but we learn to adjust to that loss. We learn to adapt. But my grandmother passed away 30 years ago, and I could be driving down the street and I would see something or hear something, and it will trigger a thought or a memory. That's the key of the memories. We will never, the memories that we have of them will never be erased. And from time to time, those memories will come back to surface. So we will learn to live with grief, and we learn to adapt it. One of the things that I will say is this, that as you live with grief, the pain will become less, and when you attend to it, the pain will become less sharp over time.
You
And
know,
your grief is sharp right now as you process your grief. It won't be as sharp 5 years, 10 years from now. It's when we don't do anything about our grief, it will remain with us sharp. There are times when I see people who, like I would say recently, someone came to see me and he told me that his loved one passed, his son passed 20 years ago. And when he talked about his son, it was as though it just happened. And so when we don't do anything about our grief, we can become stuck in a painful place.
you know,
And go ahead.
I was going to say that one of the things that I do sometimes is I look at other people's lives, like, you know, you were talking about Job and you were talking about, I look at other people's lives and they survived harsh situations, harsh realities, harsh times. And because of those stories and because of the resiliency of one that loves God or thinks about God, you know that you can make it through the situation that is faced before you. Those stories and those and then the evidences of things around you. You know, you may see a guy that has gone through a lot and he's still standing, he's still functioning, he's still. And then you look at that and you're going through something. It may not be as harsh as his, or it may be as harsh. And you say, if this guy can do it, I can do it too.
Absolutely, absolutely. I want to come back to the question in the chat where someone mentioned about the feeling of guilt, the relief of that person who has died, but feel ashamed as well. And I just want to say that it is not unusual for grievers to feel relieved and at the same time feel guilty. And I think that the guilt comes because, the guilt comes from the thought of, I shouldn't be feeling this way. I shouldn't be feeling guilty. My loved one has passed. This at times is looked upon as a bad thing. And here I am feeling relief. I shouldn't be, we tell ourselves we should not be feeling that way. And when we feel that way, we feel ashamed. So grief is an interesting experience, you know, but when we are confronted with that guilt, it's important to ask yourself, is my guilt realistic? And a lot of times our guilt is not realistic. It is a part of the grief, but at times it's not realistic.
What do you mean realistic? What do you mean by realistic?
Very good question. It's just like, am I supposed, let me think about this. Being realistic is just being real about the situation.
Right.
Being real about the situation. This guilt
A
that
person
I'm
died.
feeling, is this a real guilt?
Is
this a real guilt? You know? And a lot of times we beat upon ourselves, that we just beat upon ourselves a lot. I shouldn't. And so the guilt at times, it's not a real guilt, that we're just beating up on ourselves. We shouldn't be feeling this way or thinking this way. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
all right, thank you.
Someone mentioned, can I go over the 5, let me go back and look at the 5 steps of dealing with grief. Give me a moment here so I can find it. So the 5 steps are acknowledgement that this is a difficult time right now and I am hurting. The second one is attentiveness. Give attention to your emotion or your emotions. Availability, being available to heal. Adjustment, every loss will need significant time and patience to adjust. And the last one is assistance, being available to let others help you and reach out for help. So one of the things that I want to get into real quick is that I'm going to do a scavenger hunt, with this Zoom way of doing life. We have to be creative. And so what I would like for you to do is to find something. I want to give you at least 4 minutes or 5 minutes to go through your house and find something that reminds you of the person who has died in your life. There's this term called transitional object. And what that means is that we tend to hold on to things that used to belong to the person who has died. And so something in your house, try to find something in your house that can honor the person who has died. And I want to give you an example. I have this. I don't remember where I got this. I may be at a garage sale or Goodwill. I can't recall. But when I saw this, it reminds me a lot of my grandmother who raised me. It reminds me of water, and it reminds me of my grandmother. It is aged. And when I was growing up with my grandmother, I used to go to this well to fetch water. And so there were times when I would take cans that look like this. And my grandmother, it reminds me of my grandmother. So I keep this very dear to me. Wherever I go, I take this with me because it has a special bond. So this is like a transitional object. This helps me to remember my grandmother. Also, ginger. I love the smell of ginger. And when my grandmother was alive, she would make what's called coconut cake with ginger. And so, so ginger reminds me of my grandmother. And so I use ginger a lot. So find something in your house that reminds you of someone significant in your life who has passed, and bring that back and share it with us. So I want you to go on a scavenger hunt for about 4 or 5 minutes, okay?
I cannot go on a scavenger hunt because I'm kind of stationary right now.
Oh, okay, but you can tell us something. So find something and bring it back.
But here,
Are we back? Is everyone back? All right. So you went on a hunt for something in your house to honor and recall the person who has died. Anyone want to share that thing that you have found?
Yeah, I do. This is, it's hard to see, but this is, it's hard to see, but I found a picture, and with my background, it's hard to show, but it's a picture of my mom on her 59th birthday, my daughter and me. And I keep this in a prominent place in my home. My mother's been dead since 1998, but it's a photograph that I treasure because it's the 3 generations of the girls in our family. And also, you may not be able to see this real well, Pam, but this is Aki. And so my mother was oh, I tell you, I can't make it work with this background. I would need to take the background off. Let me try that. But anyway, Aki is a the traditional fruit from Jamaica. And my mother was an exceptional cook, exceptional. I used to say to her that if she would just cook, we would open a business because we know people would buy her food. It was just so good, so good. And nonetheless, um, she could cook. And the one compliment, my mother was not a warm woman, so she wasn't a person that gave compliments or anything like that, but she told me, she said, you know, girl, you know, you can really cook. And that meant the world to me because that's the one compliment that I received from my mother, and my mother could cook. Oh my. So I was trying to take this background off so I could show you this can, but Pam, you know what Aki is.
Oh yeah,
You
I know
can
what
you
it
can
is.
put it in front of your body.
Oh, is that it? Okay, let me try that. Oh, well, thank you. If I can, oh, thanks, Pat.
Oh,
So it's, so I have this can of Aki, and I wouldn't take up a lot of time to say what it is, but those that know, you cook this thing up and it just, all I think about is my mother when I'm cooking, particularly Jamaican dishes. And then this picture, well, it's not working so much with the,
Make sure it's only on you and not touching the background.
okay. So this picture, it's hard to see, but it's a picture of my mom, my daughter and me. So those are the things that I have.
Okay.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing.
Sure.
Someone else, what did you find?
You got to take yourself off mute, Noel.
Am I on?
Yeah,
Yes.
you're on now.
Okay. Well, my oldest brother passed away 1994, and he was like a role model to me. And I believe in my life, I never cried as much as I cried when my brother passed away, because he was like a father and also a big brother to me. I was living in Washington, in Seattle, when he passed in New York. And I went to the funeral, and my sister was asked me to take something that will remind you of Godwin. And I look in what he had, and I took out this tie. Did you see this tie?
Oh, yes, yes.
For
That's beautiful.
26 years, I did not wear this tie. I have it in a special safety box. Now, I never saw him wore this tie, but I just see him with the tie. I just thought about what he was thinking about when he bought this tie. Those are the things that I cherish. And I vision him with this tie on, with a white shirt and a nice suit. So this is what I have that reminds me of him. I would tell myself sometimes, oh, I'm gonna wear it, but I cannot find myself wearing it because I don't want it to be destroyed. It meant a lot to me. He taught me the best thing in life, things that my dad didn't tell me. He told me. And he was so special too. Even when I was coming to America, he was living here some years before, and he gave me some hints as to how to do things when I'm at my workplace, when certain things confronts me in America, what I should and should not. And I cherish those words. I even live them out today. That
That's
made me
beautiful.
even safe. because he knew me. He knew how my mouth was, the things I would say to people. And I remember before he died, when he heard I was coming to America, he said, "This is what you do, and this is what you do not do."
It's beautiful.
Just thinking
Well,
about
thank you
it,
so much.
just thinking about him, tears come to my eyes.
Mm,
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate you sharing that. Awesome.
Mhm.
Someone else. What did you find? Terry, you are on mute. There you
Yes,
go.
you probably can't see me well because of the lighting, but this is a nightshirt. This belongs to my grandmother.
Mm,
It's very special to me. My grandmother raised me, and it just reminds me when she wore this, because I wear it sometimes in memory of her, but it reminds me of her laying in the bed with candy or some kind of food, and her calling me in the middle of the night or early in the morning. I can envision her with this nightgown on and chewing on some candy and asking me, "What am I doing, sugar mama?" in the middle of the night. And so I often wear this, as mammy made as it is. I still cherish it and I wear it to this day. And she's been gone almost 17 years.
mm, mm-hmm.
And
Wow.
then I have a watch that was my mother's. My mother was very much into jewelry. I've never been, even before becoming Adventist. Um, but I hold on to this watch because it just reminds me of her and um, just how she was. She liked jewelry. She liked, gold. She liked those kind of things. And so I keep it and just in memory of her.
It's beautiful, beautiful. Thanks for sharing, Terry. That's beautiful. Anyone else feel comfortable sharing?
Mammy made them.
Pam, one of the things while somebody else is waiting to speak, when I think about my mom, and those who are close to me know this, that there's not a day that goes by that I don't quote something my mother would say to me. Every day, there's not a day. So she's in my heart, and I hear myself saying, my mom would say this, or my mom would say that. And as I said, those that know me know that about me, that, yeah.
That's beautiful. Anyone else you feel comfortable sharing something that reminds you of your loved one?
I have something.
Oh, go
This
ahead.
is, oh, okay, sorry. This is my aunt's fan. My dear, 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 dear aunt. She grew up with us, and this is her fan that when she passed, we went through her things, and I wanted to take something that I could have that would be small and also that I could carry. And so, yeah.
Beautiful, Paula. I love it. Sandranita gave me a fan, something like that, some time ago. When I had hot flashes, I would use it quite a bit until it fell apart.
Yes, indeed.
We have to replace it for you. We'll replace it for you.
Tiffany.
I'm glad you went first, Paula, because I too have something that I just carry around. So my grandfather passed in 2019, and that was really, really challenging. Still is for our family. But I personally had a lot of time with my grandfather, loved him. I actually pulled off a picture really quick of something that meant a lot to me almost 10 years ago. He came to my graduation at Andrews because he was so proud that someone in the family was getting their doctorate. And for me, I was like, I can't believe you flew all the way from this small town in Texas, Tig, that our family knows. If you know Tig, we're related. I mean, that's just how small it is. So for him to take such a huge trip like that meant so much to me. And I remember that day because I changed from him calling me Aunt Tiffany because my sisters had children to I then became Aunt Dr. Tiffany. I don't know why anyway, so the night before his funeral service, we were all at his home, and I remember just kind of going throughout the whole house. But I just kind of quietly slipped into his closet, and I guess my mom must have seen me go back there, and she was like, "You can take something out if you want." And so I ended up taking his hat.
Oh.
And I'm so glad that I did, because during the funeral service, I remember someone getting up and saying, his name was Herbert. And they were like, Herbert wore a lot of hats. And I'm the baby girl of three sisters, three of us. And I remember leaning over to them and saying, and I got one of them. Thank you, Paula, for that, because it's mobile. I can wear it, but it's so symbolic of just all of the hats he wore and the impression that he had on all of us. And it just reminds me too, if he typically wore hats when he would sing. During the summertime, my mom would let us go and stay with him, and I always wanted to go to church with him for his concerts. And so, yeah, it's good
beautiful.
Thank you.
I love the hat. Oh, I look forward to seeing you wearing that hat, girl. Anyone else want to share what you found in your scavenger hunt around your house?
I do want to share something. I talked about my beard and how I look like my father when I have this beard on, but I look back over Jesus's life, and they wanted his garment. They wanted that garment. When he died, they wanted that garment so bad that they cast lots for it. So having things to remind us of our loved ones I think is important. I don't think in the the thought process that we forget about our loved ones. And like you said, sometimes it might be 20 years and you'll hear something and you'll smile, or you'll hear something and you'll weep, or you'll see something and you say, that's like my mom, or like my dad, or like my sister, or whoever. And it as time goes by, it's more comforting than it is sorrow.
Beautiful. It's beautiful. All right, don't want to miss anyone. But is there someone else before we close today?
Hi, this is Aloma, and I have. Oh, show the video. I'm sorry. I have my husband's old Bible, and I have his sweater and pajamas, and his watch. It doesn't work, but I still have his watch. So it's it's well worn.
Yes. Thanks so much for sharing that. Oh.
Hey, Sister Flora.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay, we can hear you.
This is the walking sticks that my husband collect. Oh, yeah. Can you see them?
Yes.
And I gave one away, but I got about 7 that he collect. Someone asked me, are you gonna keep them? I said, if anyone need them, I will give them away, but I haven't found anyone that needed a walking stick yet, but I have about 7.
Put it in front of you again. Let me see that walking stick.
This is a tall one here, and this one is a medium size. Oh, one here, and this is another one right here. So this is just 3 of them that I show. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. Oh man, these are powerful. These, I don't know if you realize how powerful these things are and how they remind us of that bond, that connection that no death can ever take away from us. That's how deep our love for our loved ones are, that no death can take these things away from us. Anyone else? If not, going once, okay, Tom.
You know, if you ever wonder why I get a little political, I just want you to know it's in my family.
Okay.
My father used to be a state representative of Washington, or in Washington, and then a state senator, and then he ran for governor, which he didn't make the governor, but he left me a license plate. So I kept that. So just to let you know, it's in my blood.
Yes, yes. Oh, sweet, sweet. That's very special, Tom. Very special.
It is.
I'm learning to a little bit more about each one of you as I listen to what you are sharing. All right. Anyone else want to share something in honor of your loved one? That's beautiful. So making room for grief. You have made room for grief today. And I have shared a lot of things with you. And, you know, when we integrate the things that I share, like how to cope into your grief experience, we will accelerate with resilience. We will experience hope. We'll be able to continue to journey on because we will continue to face losses in our lives. And so the tools that you gain today, you can integrate them into whatever you may go through in the future. And so I will encourage you to continue to attend to you. Because as I mentioned before, when we suppress grief, we will live in pain. So make room for God. Make room for grief. Let God come into our experience and help us with the healing that needs to take place. Also, as we conclude today,
I get some grapefruit juice.
I hope that some of you may have gotten an email about a candle, to bring a candle with you. Did anyone bring a candle? And so I have a candle. And so this candle is in honor of your loved one who has passed away. That's what it represents. It honors the person who has passed away. It also symbolizes making room for God. It symbolizes making room for your grief. It symbolizes a commitment to make sure that you take care of you. And it also represents inviting, I'm getting a lot of background.
Sorry, that's me. Sorry.
Okay.
I was looking for a candle.
Okay. It also symbolizes the light of Christ shining in the darkness. Sometimes grief can seem pretty dark. And so this symbolizes the light of Christ shining in the darkness of grief. And so at this time, and it's a light that cannot be overwhelmed by the darkness of grief. Its light is always shining. And so I want you at this time to light your candle in honor of your loved ones in honor of you, attending to you as you continue to journey on. Can I see your candles that you have lit? Anyone else has a candle? I want to see the candles. So I want you to turn on your camera if you have lit a candle.
Can I say something, Pam?
Sure.
I just wanted to say one of the things that has helped me in my grief is a scripture. It says, "When I sit in darkness, the Lord will be a light unto me."
When I sit
This
in
reminds me of
darkness.
that. Mm-hmm.
It's beautiful. Is that an angel, Terry? That's beautiful. Oh, Tiffany, I can see your candle. Oh, beautiful, beautiful. Light in the darkness. In John chapter 1, verses 4 and 5. I get emotional every time I read this. It says, "In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. May the light of Christ continue to shine bright as you make room for grief, as you make room for God. Death cannot take away the love that God has put in your heart for those who have gone before us. Yemi, I see your light. Oh, such a joy to see Yemi. Yemi's all the way in Delaware. So good to see you, Dr. Yemi. Thank you so much again for
Thank
joining
you.
me in this workshop on making room for grief. And friends, I encourage you, if you are going through grief, make sure that you take care of you so that you can be a better you. And again, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Maybe you want to say something before I go, and this is a time where you can say that about your light.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, can hear you. Now I can't hear you anymore.
You muted, Brother Noel.
Take yourself
You're
off mute.
muted.
Take yourself off mute, Noel.
Well, while Noel is coming back to, well, we've got his video. No, that's Patrick. Okay.
Am I on now?
Yes, you are.
Yes. I appreciate when you mention, I never knew that even through a failure.
We lost you.
Okay, someone else can go ahead until he gets back. Sanjanita, you can go ahead.
Yeah, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. I thank God for the loved ones that have passed, that I had the opportunity to have time with. Thank God for taking the time to make those lives, and that have impressed me so deeply. And yes, in the beginning of grief, it was just hard to let go, but I've come to a place where I'm just thankful for the life and for the experiences. And it's true with this exercise we just went through. Nothing is ever wasted and nothing's lost. It's just changed. And for that, I'm grateful.
Beautiful, beautiful. Any closing thoughts from anyone else
Just
about your light?
I just want to say thank you for reminding us to make room for grief. It invites intentionality, not just for the person who is grieving, but also for family and friends who are, looking from the outside. And I appreciated that Kent mentioned Jesus in Gethsemane. He had his disciples wait while he went away, and he was essentially making room for grief because he knew what was to come. Thank you for that. That was very impressionable for me.
It's beautiful. Thank you. Anyone else as we end today? I recall my grandmother, when I was living with my grandmother, we were living in the country. There was no electricity. And she will gather us together at night, and we will sit around this table. And there was this little lamp, little oil lamp, kerosene oil lamp sitting on the table. And at times it was like this, just this little lamp on the table, and it shone very brightly in that house. And so it really touches my heart as I honor and remember her and the legacy of her life and the legacy of the life of our loved ones. No death can ever take that away. That light continued to shine bright within us. And like Sanjanita said, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. So let your light continue to shine before men so that they can see God's good work in you and glorify our Father in heaven. Be blessed. Take care of yourself. And again, thank you so much, YBS, for allowing me to do this workshop to highlight the grief that we may be experiencing and our culture is going through. So God bless you all. Let's end with a prayer. Let's end with a prayer. I feel like I need to end with a prayer. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord's face shine before you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon each and every one of us and give us peace now and forevermore. Amen. Be
Amen.
blessed.
Thank you, Pam.
Amen.
Thank you. Beautiful.
Yeah. We want to
Amen.
say it's very special thank you to you. This has been a program brought to you by the Women's Ministry of Your Bible Speaks Community Church. Pam, amazing, amazing. Thank you so much. And to the people who have come on that we don't know, welcome. Thank you for coming. It was so nice for you to spend time with us. We do have more programming that we will be doing in the future. In February, we have Black Women's Lives Matter, where every week we will be talking about Black women and how they are affected. We have 4 topics: mental health, faith, the community, church. And so that's going to be coming up in February. We just want to say thank you so much and God bless you. Thank you again, Dr. Pam, Dr.
Bye,
Strong. We
everyone.
appreciate
Thank
you.
you.
Amen.
Thank
Amen.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Paula,
Yes,
Paula,
sir.
when are those? When
So
are your
those are going to
programs?
they're going to be on every Wednesday in February. And you can access them through our YouTube channel, which is Your Bible Speaks Community SDA Church. Yep, you can access them there, and also other programming as well, like our past church services, and Touch of Health has had some amazing speakers as well, talking about things we can do for our health. So yes.
Awesome. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Bye for
Okay,
now.
thank you. God bless.
May God bless you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Good night.